we won't have time to take everybody's question from the audience.
Why won't you let us
Questions
ask the
will be
question
given to
from the floor?
candidates for them to answer after the program. If they choose to give us in writing their answers to all of the questions that you submitted, then we will put that on our website, Women's Alliance for Democracy and Justice. You can find the answers there if the candidates have chosen to address those. So the first question, Mr. Trone, what are 3 things you would champion to reverse the structural income inequality we have in this nation?
First of all, we got to talk about education, because at the end of the day, it's all going to go back to education. We've got to help our folks that are at the bottom end of the food chain, the bottom of the financial strata, to move up, and education's the key. So it's universal pre-K. Last year, this year, 5 schools were added to universal pre-K, and they're studying it. Well, we need to add every school to universal pre-K. We need to attack the 0 to 5, because kids in Title I schools don't hear the words at their homes. Kids in a high-income neighborhood hear almost 30 million more words at age 1, 2, 3, and 4 than the kids in a Title I area. No wonder they don't read. We have to have community college that's free. But not everybody wants to be in community college. They may want to be an electrician or a plumber. Awesome jobs. So we need free tech school. Second area we have to attack is the tax situation. I mean, what Trump has done to take the corporate tax rate from 35% down to 21% is absolutely wrong. That's a giant, giant giveaway, and that can't stand long term. So what we need to do is look at what the real tax rate was before. The real effective tax rate was actually 24%. That's what companies paid. The rate's 35, they paid 24. Was that competitive? Absolutely. The rest of the world, the G7 countries, were paying 23%. So we're at 23, they're at 24. And we didn't need the damn tax reduction.
Let me just repeat that each candidate will only have 1.5 minutes to answer the audience questions so that we can get to more audience questions. And please be noticing Ms. Tony Evans in the front there is giving you your time. You can be aware of that. Thank you. So, Mr. Caldwell, what are 3 things you would champion to reverse the structural income inequality we have in this nation?
Well, as I said earlier before, I do not subscribe to this, to trying to equal the equality of outcomes through government planning and programs. So I would reverse most of those. An actual price-coordinated economy, and all that means is a free market where prices, through our choice of what we choose to trade our personal property for, determines. Prices coordinate the availability and the use of any resource better than anything that has ever been developed on this earth before. As far as education goes, I agree. It is we need education. That means the poorest among us must have the same ability and choice that Mr. Trone has and our Congress has, no matter how rich they are, to send their kids to any school that they wish to send them to. So removing government barriers of all kinds is the true and direct way to equality for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Roger Manna, what are 3 things you would champion to reverse the structural income inequality we have in this nation?
First thing is universal health care, as we mentioned before, because more and more, when my dad died because he was poor and didn't have health care was a poor people issue. It was actually, to a large extent, a people of color issue. And now it's a middle class issue, right? So now more and more of your money is going to pay for health care for you, your family, your employees, and it's not right. So that's the first income inequality that exists. The other is we need universal employment, right? We have the opportunity before us to rebuild our roads, our bridges, our schools, our water filtration plants, to build the next generation of green energy infrastructure, to rebuild the grid, right? We can do that with wind and solar and hydrokinetic turbines underwater, and we should be doing that. And lastly, we need to eliminate the achievement gap. Because as we know, how kids start off usually is a good predictor of where they'll end up. I was an exception to that rule, but although I'm not done yet. So we need, as David mentioned before, universal pre-K. We also need, I passed legislation this year, the More Learning, Less Testing Act, because kids like me and like many of you and your kids, right, we don't learn by grinding how to take a test, right? So on the national level, we need to rethink and reimagine No Child Left Behind to create an education system that works for all of our kids. That's the best predictor and level playing field for our kids.
And Nadia Hashimi, what are 3 things you would champion to reverse the structural income inequality we have in this nation? 1.5 minutes, please.
I think for a lot of issues that we've talked about today, we're talking about the kind of income effect that affects everyone. So medical debt being the #1 cause of bankruptcy, that's something that affects people across the board. It'll affect people in different ways, but it's the top cause. But what can we look at that will really change things that affect equality? Well, for one, education. Because we know that there are school districts that are severely undersourced. We have seen in the last month some really horrifying videos coming out of Baltimore. And the children who have been sitting in that school district with their coats huddled on. How many of you saw that video? But that's not District 6, but believe me, we need to care about that because that affects all of Maryland and that affects all of America. So those are the kinds of issues that affect the education system inequality that then turns into what else can we look in education? Well, how are those children disciplined? Which children end up in suspensions? And how do we make sure that we're not feeding the school to prison pipeline? We also need to make sure that we're taking a look at tax breaks because I'm less concerned with an $11 million estate not being taxed at a certain price point than I am what kinds of tax breaks are we giving to individuals? How much are people enabled to get the child care they need so that they can go out and become part of the workforce without putting such a strain on the household? So those are the 3, the medical debt, education, and the tax breaks. Thank you.
Aruna Miller, what are 3 things you would champion to reverse the structural income inequality we have in this nation?
Well, as many of the speakers have already said, education, of course, is the ultimate equalizer. From pre-K through 12, and more importantly as well, when students decide they want to seek higher education, we need to make sure that college is affordable. There's no reason why we should be the obstacle preventing an individual from achieving their dreams if they want to get higher education. So first we need to make sure that we equalize that, level playing field. Number 2, we also have this efforts throughout our nation of right to work. Well, I'll tell you what, I think we need to work towards our right to unionize. It's because of unions that we have a middle-class family in this nation. And that's how we level the playing field for people to come out, that workers have rights and that they can fight back against issues that matter to them. We should be working towards this. And number 3, I would also say that in addition to the things that everyone here said, we need to provide safety nets. Every one of us will go through life, and sometimes the things that happen to us are totally unfair. But we're here collectively together as citizens to make sure that everyone succeeds. We need to have safety nets there for people so when they do have catastrophic situations in life, that life doesn't end for them right there. Then we need to be sensitive and compassionate and understand this, because when they succeed, we all succeed. Thank you.
And Andrew Duck will be the last responder to this question. What are 3 things you would champion to reverse the structural income inequality we have in this nation?
It's always difficult to be last because other people have said a lot of things that all make sense and you agree with. It's also unfair to try to limit the number of things we need to do to 3 because there's so many more. But on my literature, if you look at the literature I have in the back, I started with the fight for a living wage. which I talked about before. I talk about fix our crumbling infrastructure, as we've already talked about. Support our unions, we've already talked about. Equal pay for equal work, that's important. Someone mentioned that earlier, but not in this question. And break up the big banks. I think we need to restore Glass-Steagall. In response to my libertarian neighbor from Brunswick, we need, it's not that I don't support free enterprise, but free enterprise requires competition. We do not have competition in our economy today. What we have is monopolistic capitalism. What we need, you can't have Microsoft pretend that it's not required to use any technology. We need to regulate that because it's not, we don't have free enterprise, we don't have competition. We need net neutrality because we need to make sure we regulate it if we don't have competition. And so there's a whole host of things we need to do to break up the large multinational corporations and and reduce their influence. We also, on tax policy, we need to repeal the Trump tax plan, and we need to make sure that capital gains taxes, your capital gains should not be taxed less than actual work. We should reward work, not punish it.
More audience questions. Each candidate will have a minute and a half, please, to respond. And Mr. Kevin Caldwell will go first on the next question. Medicare for all is a noble goal, but how is it going to be funded?
Okay. I'll ask Mr. Truman if I can borrow a few dollars. Well, this will come, how will it be funded? That's a very good question. Because if you go back to, and this is one of the reasons that I have a problem with turning health care over to the government. I have single-payer health care. I am a veteran. So we already have single-payer health care. If you think that you want that and you're begging for it, come with me to the Veterans Administration and talk to a bunch of us. And we'll tell you you don't want that under any circumstances. So how will it be funded? It will be funded directly by you. It will be added to the debt. Where else is it going to come from? Some of that unfunded cost that I told you about, up to $100 trillion, is our current Medicare debt. So it will only add to that debt. So I do not support that. Turning our health care, something over to the government, when the government doesn't already run most everything it runs very efficiently to begin with. Thank you very much.
With due respect to the previous speaker, just because Congress and the President chooses to send millions, hundreds of thousands of men and women into harm's way overseas and then not pay for their health care benefits afterwards doesn't mean that universal single-payer health care systems do not work. They do. That's why every other, that's why every other large industrialized country just about in the world and smart big corporations figured out a long time ago, we don't need a middleman between you and your doctor just getting paid. Because that's what we have in the healthcare system in this country right now, right? Somebody just getting paid, right? Somehow, in this country, we let insurance companies out of the property and casualty box where they belong into the healthcare industry. We could have let them into the lumberjack industry, but somehow they managed to finagle their way into that market, and they now control United States politics, and it needs to end.
Nadia Hashimi, Medicare for all is a noble goal, but how is it going to be funded?
So there's this wall. I don't know if you guys have heard about it or not. We could use that money, right? No, I think with a healthcare for all, with Medicare for all, the funding for that is really going to echo what's been said already. We don't need to feed insurance companies. These are corporations that did not exist in this manner in the late 60s. We've allowed them to become a full industry. We've allowed them to take from our GDP. We've allowed them to take out of our pockets. And we don't need to. I know it because I have been on the phone arguing with the insurance companies, and I have gotten the letters that they have issued on behalf of their patients that they're supposed to cover, but instead that money goes elsewhere. So let's reinvest. Let's take that money that we could be spending on premiums and invest it in a healthcare system that can work. I can tell you from running a practice that Medicare does work. It works for patients, it works on the provider side. It is a smooth and fluid system. We can always make it better, but it's there and we should be able to use it. So we'll expand it in a smart way and get our kids covered too. Because right now we've got gaps in coverage. The only place that we really have healthcare for all right now is in the emergency rooms, because that's where I've been working, and we don't care what you have. Everyone gets treated there. But it's time to expand that in a rational way so that we're providing preventative care and not taking care of crises for patients. Thank you.
Aruna Miller, how will Medicare be funded, please?
Well, I have a novel idea. How about the $1.5 trillion that we're going to wait to 1% of the population here? We can start right there by using a portion of that to be able to make sure that every individual in this country has health care. Number two, if you take a look at Medicare and Medicaid, okay, 1/4 of our population is already on Medicaid. The other 1/4 of the population is already on Medicare. So we're talking about 50% of Americans that are on single payer. So this is not a novel idea. And as previous speakers have said, this is available just about to every industrialized country in this world. Why is it the United States cannot provide this? Of course we have the funding to be able to do so. When you have the insurance companies, the overhead that is in between there is about 25%, billions of dollars. When you have a single payer, overhead is about 2%. So subtract the difference. We got a 23% of money and funding that's available to be able to pay for Medicare for all. Ultimately, again, in order to provide health care for all, it's an economic issue. If our residents and our citizens are not healthy, then how are they going to participate in our economy? And again, it's a moral and ethical issue. Believe me, there is lots of money out there. You as a taxpayer, all the revenues you bring to the state, we can pay for this across the nation. Thank you.
Andrew Duck, how can we fund Medicare?
There are lots of options. Many of these issues are very complex. I want to point out that on the table in the back, I actually have information sheets where I lay out some of the details. So if you can't get an answer in 1.5 minutes, just look at that back there. First thing when it comes to Medicare for all, it is cheaper than what we have now. People ask how we're going to pay for it. It costs less. And that is largely because we are getting rid of that middleman that's taking a huge chunk. The United States spends 40% more than the second most expensive country on our health care. That's absurd. As Aruna Miller said, the government already funds about 50% of our health care. We can quibble about how the numbers work, but it's about 50%, especially if you include not just Medicare and Medicaid, but also veterans. And I will tell you, I am a veteran. I go for my care at Walter Reed. I get the best medical care in the world. In House Bill 676, there are a number of things that are outlined that show how we're going to pay for it. Some of that includes a transition tax on taxes on the Wall Street exchanges, very small tax. It would reduce machine trading, it would make the markets work better, and it would help fund Medicare for all. We should increase the tax on people who earn over $1 million. People who earn over $1 million used to pay 50% of their taxes under Ronald Reagan. We ought to be able to do better than we're doing now.
David Trem, let's answer this question last.
I think certainly we have to start with the PACs again. And if we don't get rid of the PACs and the money in politics, the number one, I'll say it again, the number one group that gives out the campaign contributions is the pharmaceutical industry. They're driving the costs up because they're keeping their profits up. So we got to get rid of that disaster, and we got to allow the government to negotiate for lower cost of prescriptions. And with health care for all, as Nadia pointed out, we've got to get people out of the emergency room. The emergency rooms are the most inefficient place in America to render health care. And that cost, inefficient cost, is borne by every one of us in this room. It's hundreds of billions of dollars of cost that's delivered inefficiently, and of course we go back then to the tax cut. Carried interest alone, the hedge funds have a special piece in that thing Mr. Trump did. 23.8 they pay, 23.8. But they're all earning at the top level, which is now 37. So they've created themselves a giant loophole for the hedge funds. We got to fix that. We got to take away that. But that's once again the PAC money, the lobbyist money, the influence that doesn't represent anybody in this room. None of us are being thought about there, just their own profits. And obviously the entire C Corp tax rate has got to go up.
So we have time for one more question. We did have over 40 questions submitted from the audience. And again, if the candidates will give us in writing their answers, we'll give them the questions. We'll post that on our website. This is going to be tricky for you all. Starting with Roger Mano. Three-part question. Sorry, guys. What are your two greatest concerns? 1.5 minutes, yes. What are your two greatest concerns about the current administration's global policies? Specifically, several people in the audience would like to know your position on two policies related to Israel, and these are yes/no questions. Do you support Trump's decision on relocating the U.S. Embassy? No. Yes or no? Do you agree with Ben Cardin's anti-boycott act? Roger Mano first, please.
So the question, repeat
You want
the
me to
question?
repeat it? Sure, yeah. So the first part of the question that you can answer in 1.5 minutes. What are your two greatest concerns about the current administration's global policies? And then in yes or no, please, do you support Trump's decision on relocating the U.S. Embassy? And do you agree with Ben Cardin's anti-boycott act?
Well, the first answer to the first question as to my concerns with Trump's global policies is that I don't really think he has one. I think he's a menace, to be honest with you. I think he's isolated us from the rest of the world. It's not his trade policies. You know, it's the fact that he wakes up in the morning and he picks a fight. He picked a fight with Australia. You know, I mean, so I don't think he has a global policy, and that has put us in a very precarious position internationally with some of our allies, in fact, and in the United Nations. Now, your second question, or the second?
Yep.
First part of the second.
The next two are yes/no answers. Do you support Trump's decision on relocating the U.S. Embassy?
It is the policy that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. That's been the policy since 1990-something, according to the United States Congress.
Relocating the U.S. Embassy.
Well, that is the U.S. policy.
Why don't you answer the question?
And do you
That
agree
is-
with Ben Cardin's anti-boycott act?
Which bill are we talking about?
So because this is an audience question, I can't give you more information on it. Why don't we pass that one on? Because we're at our...
Anti-boycott diversity.
It's called the Anti-Boycott Act.
Anti-BDS.
Against Israel. It's against Israel.
So my position on BDS is that anybody has the right in this country, as long as it's legal and it doesn't incite violence, to boycott, to do, to picket. I've participated in picket lines. That is your right in this country. Now, I don't support the BDS effort, and I choose not to participate in it. But you have a right to do that if that's what you choose to do.
Okay, thank you.
As long as it doesn't incite violence and it's legal.
Thank you. And Nadia Hashimi, the same complicated question. So what are your two greatest concerns about the current administration's global policies? We'll start with that one.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to echo, and I bet all of us are going to be echoing the same thing, is that he just is chaotic. President Trump right now does not seem to have a handle on who the world leaders are and how he can assert that the United States can be the leader with his policies and with his antagonism, and the fact that it's done on social media just really changes how the world views us. So the movement towards isolationism in the face of what we know is a movement around the world of globalization is just out of tune, and it's just completely tone deaf. So we need to be aware of the fact that we're coming together right now. I've had the opportunity to travel around the world for peace engagements and speaking engagements, and people around the world come to me and they say, what is going on over there? What is he doing? I cannot speak for him. I don't know what's happening in his mind. Now, I think what we can also look at the second issue with him is that he's got his button. His trigger finger is a little bit too happy for me. So I would take a look at what he's able to do and make sure that we are surrounding him with some sane people and making sure we get the right people into office to kind of counteract what's happening and get the right PR out there.
So then the next two are yes/no questions. Do you support Trump's decision to relocate the U.S. Embassy?
No, I think he's just pushing a hot button issue for
Thank
his
you.
own.
And do you agree with Ben Cardin's anti-boycott act?
So this is something that I don't like to answer questions without having read the material fully. So I would like to read it to understand the specifics.
Thank you.
But I will say that I agree that people should be able to boycott as they would like. At the same time, I'm one who does not believe that sanctions really work on improving diplomacy.
Okay, thank you. Aruna Miller. What are your two greatest concerns about the current administration's global policies?
Well, number one, there is no diplomacy right now with the Trump administration. He's reckless in the way he approaches other countries and other leaders, and I think that's dangerous for all of us, not only in this country, but the entire world. So those are my concerns with the Trump administration. Now, whether or not I support Jerusalem and the American embassy moving to Jerusalem, right now it's not there, but I agree with what some of the speakers have said, that I think this is a hot button issue that Donald Trump is imposing, but ultimately Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. And if we in the United States in the legislative body believe that we should move our embassy there, we do take risks because there is going to be a lot of pushback on that, and we have to be concerned for our citizens when they move to the embassy. But ultimately, if that's what we decide as a nation, then I support that. As far as the boycott is concerned regarding Senator Cardin, again, I don't know the details of that bill, but I will say this. I believe the cornerstone of our democracy is our First Amendment rights, right? Our freedom of speech, our freedom to protest, our freedom to assemble. This is the cornerstone, and we can do this. But when individual businesses discriminate against an entire nation, I consider that to be discriminatory. So I am opposed to boycott of Israel.
Thank you.
South Africa,
Thank you. And the next one to address that question is Andrew Duck. What are your two greatest concerns about the current administration's global policies?
Okay, I do believe that Donald Trump has a global policy. Donald Trump's global policy is one that he would sum up as sovereignty and anti-globalization. The way I would phrase it up is Donald Trump supports dictators and strongmen over human rights. That's Donald Trump's foreign policy. He can't explain it, but we can. I believe in a diplomacy-first foreign policy. Donald Trump is much too quick on the trigger finger, and he does not understand the cost in human lives that those of us who have to put our lives on the line do understand. I've buried my friends, and I will tell you the loose talk he has about the Korea issue is dangerous and wrong. There are two specific yes-no questions that have to do with the Israeli-Palestinian challenge, and that is much more complicated than you can answer in two yes-no questions, and I'd be happy to have a further discussion with anybody on that. I will. Don't worry, I will. First of all, I'm going to say I support a two-state solution. Both the Palestinians and the Israelis should be able to live together in peace. I do not think we should have relocated the embassy by fiat. That should have been part of a negotiated solution. We should. It will eventually need to be renegotiated. I think that we can have Israel as Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine. I think we can work that. And I believe in freedom of speech, and you can boycott if you wish.
Thank you.
Thank you. greatest concerns about the current administration's global policies?
I mean, the biggest issue is the Paris Accords. I mean, we're the only country in the world now that's not part of the Paris Accords. Even Syria is part of the Paris Accords. The second thing is the bellicose treatment of North Korea. We're dealing with a person that's unstable. Why do we treat him that way? We're dealing with two people that are unstable. Thanks for the correction. So why are we going to put those two folks in the same room? And it's crazy. State Department needs to lead diplomacy, not the Defense Department. The country determines where their own capital is. Israel determined where their capital is, and it's Jerusalem. The timing of the move, as Ben Cardin said, wasn't really good. And it should have been worked through the State Department. We certainly need a two-state solution. There's certainly an opportunity to have a capital for the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, for sure. The BDS movement is despicable. That's simple. Ben Cardin's bill, I've read it. I'm working with Ben Cardin right now, and I'm working with the president, the head of the ACLU, Anthony Romero, who's head of the ACLU.
They oppose the
And I'm
bill.
This is
working
not
with
an opportunity for the audience to speak
And
out.
I know exactly where the ACLU is because I'm close friends with the head of the ACLU. So we're working with them, and we're working with Senator Cardin to get a bill that meets everyone's needs and protects everyone's First Amendment rights. Thank you.
Last speaker on this. What are your two greatest concerns about the current administration's global policies?
All right, I started this off, so I guess I'll be the last one to answer a question as well. I support free trade with other nations, as the president does not. Also, I support ending all aid that supports military, foreign militaries. Ending all aid to any country of anywhere supporting their military. As far as your questions go, I think these are the same ones that were put out on the survey, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, I do support the movement of the capital, or of it moving, but in truth, that has been legislation since 1995. The only thing that was added to that legislation was the caveat that the president could veto it on security issues. I wish it had been used a little bit more to negotiate, but that doesn't mean I do not support the Palestinians' claim to East Jerusalem. I wish we can use that, maybe that we've done that favor for Israel, to bring them to the table to negotiate that out as well. And on the second part of the one, no, I do not support that bill whatsoever. And it's the same thing you'll find on my answers that you sent me. Thank you very much.